Sorry. I by no means am pretending to get us through every word of this in 3 weeks. This is a presentation which will hopefully illuminate your curiosity, so you dig into it deeper, and we will continue to have conversations about this report as we go forward. So this 8th principle project class, Widening the Circle of Concern, has commenced. So I'm going to share 8 guidelines for this work, if I can find them, and of course I can. And we'll start with these, and I will share these documents with the class as we go along. One thing else you should know about me on Zoom, especially at night, I don't see well anyway, even out of my one remaining good eye, and I can't see people. So sometimes you'll have to interrupt me or get Debbie's attention to interrupt me. So I apologize for that in advance. I just can't look at the screen constantly. Sorry. So this comes from Visions Incorporated, and these are guidelines for work in equity and inclusion. And I include these because the commission themselves, they began with a couple of weeks of consultation by Visions Incorporated. And they chose to recommend that we use these in our equity and inclusion work. Let's see. Hey, Nicole Gray, can you and I both read these so it's not just my voice? I know you like to read stuff.
Absolutely, sure.
So I'll read the odds and you can read the evens. How about that?
That sounds like a plan.
All right. So 8 guidelines for equity and inclusion work. Try on. This is an invitation to be open-minded to others' ideas, feelings, worldviews, and ways of doing things so that greater exploration and understanding are possible. The invitation also includes feeling free to take those things that fit and to leave or file away those things that don't fit.
It's okay to disagree. Assumes that disagreement is not only inevitable, but can help individuals and groups produce better outcomes. By acknowledging what we have in common and by recognizing, understanding, and appreciating what is different between us, individuals and groups can shift the pressure to be, think, or act the same into permission to generate all possible ideas and strategies. This guideline assumes we can disagree and still stay connected and do great work.
It's not okay to blame, shame, or attack ourselves or others. This assumes that most of us have learned well how to show our disagreement by making the other person wrong. This happens in direct, indirect, verbal, and nonverbal ways. When we attack, shame, or blame ourselves and others, we are less likely to take in what others are sharing and less likely to problem solve across our differences.
Practice self-focus assumes that our learning about differences can be accelerated and maximized when we listen to our internal thoughts, feelings, and reactions. When we find ourselves getting irritated with someone about cultural differences, we can blame or shame them or ourselves, or we can figure out internally what is causing our irritation. An effective tool for practicing self-focus is using I rather than we, you, or one statements. When we intend to refer to others, be specific about who those others are by name or group. In addition, when speaking about our own experience or opinion, use I have found or I think, I feel, I believe, and include feeling words such as mad, sad, scared, happy, relieved, etc.
Notice both the process and the content. And this means notice both what we say and how and why we say or do something, and how the members of the group react. For example, notice who's active and who's not, who's comfortable and who's not, who's interested and who's not, including ourselves. Ask about both the process and content, and share our own thoughts and feelings too.
Practice both and thinking. Invites us to see that more than one reality or perspective can be true at the same time, diunidal thinking, rather than seeing reality as strictly either or, right or wrong, good or bad, this or that, dichotomous thinking. Using both and thinking can be very helpful in reconciling differences and conflicts that do not present easy solutions.
Be aware of both the intent and impact of your actions. This invites us to consider that in cross-cultural interactions, our intent might not match the impact we have. When we have a negative impact on others across culture, ensuring a successful outcome requires changing that negative impact. This guideline requires a willingness to take risks and to exchange and receive honest feedback about the impact of our words and actions on others. It is possible to be well-intentioned and still say and do hurtful things. To be successful across differences, we must be willing to shift our behaviors and actions such that people who are different from us feel fully valued and included.
Confidentiality invites us to honor personal sharing and to not repeat personal details outside of the group. Confidentiality assumes that feeling free to share in one setting does not translate into comfort in other settings. So if we want to bring up information related to a person sharing in other settings, we need to privately ask the person if it is acceptable to do so. Confidentiality also assumes that we will not use something someone has shared to hurt them, get them, or punish them later. This is especially important for work groups or teams involving multiple staff or organizational levels. Participants are encouraged to freely share their learnings about theory, practice, and themselves in any setting of their choice.
Thank you, Nicole Gray, very much. So, it's important as we learn to dismantle white supremacy to understand the models that we're engaging and to use the social analysis of those we claim to be in allyship with. And this is why we sort of begin this presentation of widening the circle of concern with that particular list. I'll share that with you all in an email later. But now let us see who's in the room, okay? And so I sort of, I'm gonna put this into the chat so we remember how to do it. And we'll go in alphabetical order to make it easier. All right, so please share your name, pronouns, how long at UUCM, and your current leadership position. So I'll start, Reverend Scott. He, him, his. I've been at UUCM since August 1st, 2017, and my current leadership position is as co-minister. All right, so alphabetical order. I'll see if I remember my alphabet. Let's have Abby first.
Okay, Abby Kessler, she, her, hers. I've been at the U since, I guess, 1990 with a 10-year gap.
Awesome. And your current leadership position?
I'm not in a leadership position right now, but I'm certainly involved.
Yeah, you are. You are involved in a lot of things. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for being here. Annalise.
Hi, Annalise, she, her, hers. Excuse me. I think I've been at UUCM for about 10 years. That sounds about right. And currently I'm serving as co-chair of the Undoing Racism Committee, and I don't have a title, but I sort of logistically coordinate the Allies for Racial Equity group here at UUCM.
Awesome. Welcome. Dana Moore.
Good evening. I am coming up on my 1-year anniversary of membership at the U this February. Thank you. I am a co-leader and facilitator of Harvest the Power, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism here in our Montclair congregation, and Connection Cafe.
Wonderful. Deborah Antropoldi.
Hi, I'm Deborah Ann, she, her, and hers. I started not long after Reverend Scott did. He dragged me here. Seriously. I'm on the communications team leader and leader of Sacred Wheel.
Wonderful. Ellie. Oh, you need to unmute. There you go.
Hi, Ellie, she, her, hers. I am UUCM adjacent for about 1.5 years now. And, you know, I'm this close to membership, but I kind of want to do it in person. I don't want to do it on Zoom. So, and I have been working with the Social Justice Committee and the URC committee. So I wanted to find out more about all that's going on internally.
Awesome. Dr. Mary Jones.
Hi, yeah, she, her, hers. I've been a member for about 1.5 years, a year of which has been in shutdown.
Right.
I've tried to be involved in as many things as I could before COVID, especially MESH. And this is where I'm at now, and I'm not technically good, so it's like my 3rd Zoom try.
Doing great.
This one seems to be working.
All right. It must be our tech. Must be all because of Deb. All right. Nicole Gray.
Hi. I've been a formal member for, I came in on September 1st, and I was a guest, an itinerant guest for a long time. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And so I'm on Council of Ministries, and my ministry area is connection and engagement. And I'm working in the 8th Principal Committee and on the pledge team, and having a great time. Thanks.
All right. I skipped over Francesca somehow.
Oh boy. Okay, Francesca Elms, she, her, hers. I've been a member, well, I've been attending the U since 1995. And my current leadership position is that I'm on the board, member at large. And I'm also, and have been for many years, the educational consultant to the RE team.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nicole Rinklin.
Unmute, Nicole.
Thank you. Oh, hi, everybody. Let me start again. I'm Nicole Rinklin, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I've been a longtime UU member. I grew up in our congregation, and my children attended Sunday school there, and I was involved with RE and many other things. And sometimes I've been more involved and other times less involved. Currently, I am a co-chair of the pledge drive, and I'm co-chair on Wednesday night for All Souls Matters, and I'm also chair of the Mortensen Scholarship.
All right. A lot on your plate. All right. Welcome. Norma Tassi.
Good evening. I'm Norma Tassi. I have been at the U since, I believe, 2006. And I am a past board member and a past Sunday schools teacher. And I'm on the Undoing Racism Committee now.
Wonderful. Welcome. Sarah Skillette.
Hello, I am Sarah Skillette. My pronouns are she, her.
Uh-oh, you froze up on us, Sarah. Maybe we'll come back to Sarah. Yes. All right. Shannon Gattens.
Hi, my name's Shannon Gattens. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have been coming to the U.
You You froze up on us, Sarah, so I moved on.
The whole thing, Sarah.
Yeah, we missed everything you said. You froze up as soon as you started talking. So
Okay, do
tell
you want
us
me to
again.
try again?
Yes.
Is it working now? Okay, Sarah Scalette. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I joined when I was pregnant with my 13-year-old. I think Norma and I joined together. And I'm on the Council on Ministries.
Awesome. Shannon Gatton.
I'm still Shannon Gattens, and my pronouns are still she, her, and hers. I joined the U when my 13-year-old was, I think, 10 months. So I probably started right around you, Sarah. It's been about 11 years. Right now, I am on the board as the secretary, and I'm also on the 8th Principal Committee.
Awesome. Welcome. Steve Ramsher.
Hi, all. Steve Ramsher. He, him, his. I live in Weehawken. March will be 10 years as a member, and I'm not currently in a leadership position.
Welcome. Sue Ralfer.
Hello, Sue Roffer, she, her, hers. I've been with you for 13 years. I just did the math. And I am currently on the board as the immediate past president.
Ooh, that sounds weighty. Cool. Sue Parenti. We can't hear you, Sue. You're muted still.
There you go. Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Parenti, and I'm she, her, hers. I have been a member really for over 40 years. And I would say, yes, that major milestones in my and my family lives have all been through Unitarians, such as marriage, the kids dedicated, coming of age, all of those important life events. I've been very happy to share with Unitarian people.
Oh, awesome.
So I don't have, as I said, I don't have a leadership role. I'm a congregant. I'm one of the congregants, and happy to be so, with a curiosity really and a passion for undoing racism. So I thought I would pop in and say hi to everybody. And
blessings, blessings. Thank you so much. We have Ted Hunter, and then Dan Silver will be our last one.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ted. I'm he, him. I've been a member about 30 seconds less than Sarah. And I'm not currently in a leadership position. I recently retired from teaching OWL. And I am mentoring a candidate for coming of age this year. Starts next week, I think. So
wow, thanks.
Yeah.
And Dan Silver.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Dan Silver, he, him, his. I've been a member since 1995. Currently on the Council of Ministries, on the Finance Committee, and also heading up the men's group for now. Nice to be here.
Cool. Thank you and welcome everyone. All right, so like I said, this class is a presentation of the findings of this text. I'm going to encourage all of you to read it as much as you can. I'll go through it online to show you how it's laid out. There are some easier ways to get to what's important in the text by the way that they formatted it. And I see that one of our very industrious students has created an ebook already with some notes about this text. Is that correct? May I call you out? Mr. Steve Ramsher has apparently already done some annotation or what? Tell us what you've done.
I just took the text and threw it into a Mobi file so you can read it on a Kindle. That's all. I didn't add any annotation or anything.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So you don't have to read it on a computer or paper. You can read it on a Kindle if you're a Kindle person.
Wow.
And I sent it to you and you can send it out to the group if they want it.
That's like a mad skill there. I love that. I'm a big Kindle guy, so I appreciate that. So now I'll have 3 versions of this thing to read. So, all right. So, obviously, we have a culture that has been founded on some notions of white supremacy, and this is kind of the thing that we've been struggling with for a very long time in our culture, right? And so one of the things that I think is important is to talk about white supremacy and how it arose, but that's a whole other class, right? I mean, we did the slavery by another name. You know, in short, the rise of white supremacy is basically lurks back to the 15th century in a systematic way, with the what they call the Age of Discovery, and Europeans sailing around the world, and the Portuguese beginning the modern day slave trade. There has been slavery throughout human history in very different ways, usually as the matter of military conquest. But what started with the Portuguese in the mid 1400s ends up becoming a major commercial enterprise that really involves shipping, manufacturing, insurance, banking, any kind of construction. It was thoroughly permeated through all of our culture, and it becomes amplified in the late 1700s with the discovery of the cotton gin. And the cotton gin creates in the United States an opportunity to be the economic leader of the world's first global boom crop, cotton. And because of the moral failures of the founding fathers of our republic, their unwillingness to let go of the profit margins that they were able to get by enriching themselves off of other people's free labor, our republic was founded with slavery intact. And as you all know, it took a bloody civil war. The Civil War remains the single most bloodiest conflict in our nation's history to date. And of course, we also know that that actually did not end white supremacy. And so through things like convict leasing and, quote unquote, legal means of denying the right to vote and denying equal access to everything from jobs and homes to everything in our economic life, white supremacy lived even through all of the 20th century, and despite the Voting Rights Acts and the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s, we've seen in the last year especially how it lives in assumptions and practices, especially in those that are sworn to protect our communities, but in many other ways as well. And of course, the January 6th insurrection by domestic terrorists was fueled in large part by racist white nationalists, terrified that the duly elected president was going to do kind of what he just did. Was it yesterday when he signed all those executive orders on racial equity and reminding folks that there is systemic racism that needs to be undone? And he called it both a moral and a civic duty to do it. So here we are. And so since Unitarian Universalism, and again, I can't give you a full history of Unitarian Universalism in this course. That is another sermon, as I'm fond of saying. Unitarian Universalism, growing up in this culture, of course, it absorbed white supremacist attitudes and practices. So one of the things that's important to remember is that Unitarian Universalism, like most, if not all, religions, no matter what their flavor, didn't assume that there was a moral duty to create greater freedom and justice on the streets of the nation. the Protestant Reformation in many ways began as a very inward looking way to understand faith. And most of the religious membership in the early United States was Protestant in one form or another. And the notion that one could read the Bible for oneself and develop a personal relationship with God, just me and the Almighty, tended in many religious systems to ignore the world. So it really wasn't a part of being a good member of a congregation that you would be fighting for social justice, at least not until the early 20th century. Notably, in Unitarian Universalist history, there were lots of things that Unitarians and Universalists stood for, which we might be ashamed of today. There were not many Unitarian or Universalist churches in the South during slavery times, but there were a few. Notably in Charleston, South Carolina, John Calhoun, the famous segregationist and secessionist senator, was a member of that congregation. Additionally, over time, there were many voices in our churches that had support for limiting immigration, that resisted busing and school integration, and even eugenics. Some of the public support for prohibition, even, for instance, was racially tinged. If you ever read any of the tracts of the American Temperance Union, they say pretty heinous things about people who aren't, well, at least like me. There's one phrase that just stuck in my head. The teeming hordes storming our shores, bringing their devilish ways, must be thwarted. This was from a Prohibition newsletter. And Prohibition had many adherents in Unitarian and Universalist circles. And so all of this was kind of the way religion was lived until the coming of what's known as the social gospel movement. Walter Rauschenbusch and other famous theologians. Rauschenbusch was a Baptist, American Baptist, not a Southern Baptist. He read the life of Jesus and saw in that many of the things you've heard us uplift in worship and in other programs, that Jesus stood up for the downtrodden. He stood up for those that society was outcasting. He also reminded us that in the Bible that the Jews were freed in the Exodus from bondage. And so he reinterpreted Jesus's message and gave chase to the lie that religion is only about some personal relationship with the divine, because if the divine has a love for all humanity, which he proclaimed, which Rauschenbusch believed, and Universalists and Unitarians were proclaiming at that time in the early 20th century, then he loved the person who was so much unlike me as much as God loved me. And that began to change the way that religious people and religious institutions engaged their understanding of how they encounter the world and the problems of the world. At the time of Rauschenbusch's teachings and many folks jumping on board, we were seeing the ravages and the inequities of the late industrial revolution. And so it was very apparent to anyone who visited our cities, from 1890 until 1930, about how dirty they were, about how overcrowded they were, about how many people were dying just trying to make a living, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things made people read the Bible in a different way. And I'm speaking primarily of people from the Christian tradition. But Jewish folks as well began to read their own prophets and the Exodus story in similar ways, as did Muslims. And so really beginning around 1930s, things begin to change. And after World War II, really much of the Unitarian and Universalist movements began to organize around important issues of social justice that include economic inequality, racial justice, and then eventually gender justice and LGBTQ justice. Yes, it's true that in the 1800s, there were prominent Unitarians and Universalists who were abolitionists, who were prison reformers and other important things, but it wasn't really seen as a faith mandate for all of the flock. It was leading lights. And there were many churches and many, many members who did not think that their preachers should be talking about what's happening on the street corner and what might be wrong about the way society was organized. So it's really not until the late 40s and the early 50s that we begin to align what we're willing to call these sort of rock hard religious truths about equality and love for all people, connect it to the sacred scriptures, and then go to the place of government and say, our society isn't organized the way it should be. And so if we're going to be saying that we're a moral, faithful people, and meaning writ large, the whole nation, not just Unitarians, Universalists, we need to do things differently. So it's just important to put that kind of historical context around what we're doing. And so because of this, a lot of Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists, the two faiths merged in 1961 to form the Unitarian Universalist Association. A lot of folks who have been around for a long time have developed this notion that, we've been there. We've been on the side of justice. We fought the fight. We applauded when, there was racial justice and et cetera, et cetera. And yet, because institutions contain systems and practices and customs that transcend any single generation, a lot of the older assumptions left over from white supremacy culture never really got dismantled, and I'll use the word exorcised, from our religious lives. And these things have appeared from time to time in many different ways. But notably, I'm just going to sort of point to two. One was there was a outcry about a certain type of anti-racism training that was begun in the mid-90s. It was Jubilee training is one of the names for it. There were some other names for it. It ended up becoming what was called the Journey Towards Wholeness, the Journey Towards Wholeness. And it was confrontational, and it may not have always been applied as thoroughly and lovingly as it could, but there were a lot of reactions from white congregants, in the mid to late 90s to some of the programs and initiatives around the Journey Toward Wholeness. And so we regrouped and began to look for other ways to try and make ourselves aware of the need for this kind of justice within our institution. And we came up with a lot of improved methods of doing this, including trying to teach congregations who are in search for new ministerial staff with a program called Beyond Categorical Thinking, of trying to prepare them for ministers who don't fit the dominant cultural mold, who are not, white, male, hetero, able-bodied, etc. And sometime in 2016, 2017, there was a big eruption of disquiet, I don't know how else to put it, with the UUA president and some of the regional staff. After a long time of promising to diversify the upper level staff of the UUA, about the fourth major hire in a row was made, and it was once again a white male. And it was someone who was not someone who was really highly valued and was actually requested by some people in the district where this hire happened. This person wasn't even interviewed. And the kerfuffle after that led to the resignation of former President Peter Morales. So this was just in 2017. And it was that which made the commission be called into order. Okay. So the commission has a whole series of recommendations, and we'll start looking at them in a minute, but I've been talking for a long time. And I can do that. I get paid to talk, in case you didn't notice. But first, I want to entertain any questions, and I'm going to give you a chance to talk in smaller groups for a couple minutes, and then we'll come back and I'll do the first presentation of the report. So are there any burning questions? I see Francesca's hand, and I'll need your help with this, Debbie, because I don't see the hands so well.
No problem.
I am not good on chronology necessarily, but I understand that at some point, and I don't know when, I think it's a little further back, there was a pretty big rift between Black UUs and white UUs. There was some kind of commitment made.
Sure.
That did not get followed through on. And I think it might be significant to add to the roster of institutional kind of systemic issues that have been ongoing, but I don't know the timing of it.
Sure, I can share a little bit about that. I'm gonna put something in the chat. So there's a film made about this. It's called The Black Empowerment Controversy. So I was just trying to be brief, and I admitted way more than I possibly could have included, but this is a very important piece. So in 1967, at a General Assembly, which is the annual governing body of the Unitarian Universalist Association, there were a group of young African-American members who were being inspired by the Black Power movement. One of them was actually Dr. Karenga, who ended up being the founder of Kwanzaa. And what they asked for was something known as identity caucusing. Now, identity caucusing is commonplace in our congregations, in our institutions now, but back then, our Black members were coming to the UUA in the height of the civil rights movement, right after the Voting Rights Act, and saying, we want separate meeting space so we can caucus together, so we can support ourselves, and then come back to the larger gathering, having a better understanding how to put some of this stuff into context. And basically all they were asking for was meeting space, and they were told no. And that created a big situation. And the leader of the UUA at the time, Dana Greeley, very complex man. He was one of the leaders of getting 1 out of 3 of our ministers to show up in 1965 when Dr. King asked folks to show up in Selma. He led the charge in saying no. And he didn't have really good reasons for it. And so those who supported the Black members, they created what was called the Black Affairs Council. And there were a handful of Black members who joined with white members, and they created what was called the Black and White Alliance. So we had 2 different groups claiming to speak for the needs of all of our African-American members. And this sort of stewed for a year until the following General Assembly, which was 1968. And of course, we all know what happens before the General Assembly in 1968. Dr. King gets assassinated. So leading into the General Assembly in 1968, which I think that one was in Boston. They made it very clear they expected to have meeting space for caucusing because they really needed to figure this out. And once again was denied. In fact, Dana McLean Graley, who had the power of the gavel, who had been president of the UUA for 7 years, got off of the dais and went onto the floor to speak against the motion as if he didn't already have enough power being up on the dais with the big microphone and the gavel. So there proceeded to be a walkout of the General Assembly. And, you know, the Black delegates who were part of the Black Affairs Council and their white allies, which was a majority of the delegates and ministers in attendance, they went to a church nearby, and they decided, they came up with a plan of what they were going to do. And they chose to return, and they made demands of funding and of identity caucus space. And they were able to get them to create a commission to study it. And at the 1969 General Assembly, when Dana McLean Graley was about to no longer be president, they promised the Black Affairs Council and their allies $1 million over the next 6 years. I think it was 6 years. Well, the problem with that was there wasn't any money. One of the unfortunate realities of Dana McLean Graley's administration is he was not honest with how much money the UUA was bleeding. There wasn't any money for anything. So he promised money that didn't exist to silence a problem that he wanted to go away because he was no longer going to be president. And you can probably tell from the tone of my voice what I think about Dana McLean Graley. So the next president of the UUA, Robert West, came in, and he had the unfortunate task of telling everybody that was promised money that there wasn't any. And it was at that time we made some significant administrative changes to the way that we handle our finances. But apparently there was a big loophole in the way finances were handled in the way the UUA was originally constituted. And it was easy for a small group of men, white men, to lie about major things affecting our denomination. And then so at that time, we were growing, our Black population in our congregation was growing because they had seen us on the forefront of so much of the civil rights work. And in the 20th century, you know, at that part of the 20th century, people were becoming less traditionally religious, but they were still used to going to church, right? So, you know, Unitarian was often the next choice. And, but because of the nonsense and cowardice of some, and I'm willing to say that out loud in public, I am being recorded, and I mean what I say, that tide was reversed. And it wasn't until the mid 80s that frankly, all of Unitarian Universalist membership began to decline in 1971. And I think it had a lot to do with that, some other cultural factors. There's a film here that I put here, The Wilderness Journey. And it really does explain it in depth with some of the actual people. I know a lot of people in that film, Gordon Gibson, the white minister, who was one of the leaders of the allies of the Black Affairs Council, as well as Norma Poinsett from Chicago, amazing Black lay leader. She just died a couple years ago, great loss. And then in the 1980s, finally, they seemed to get some leadership that had the courage to say, we need to re-examine this. And they began to tell the truth about what happened. And they began to pass resolutions in favor of a more confrontational approach to Black justice, not just on our streets, but within our institutions. That wasn't as short as I hoped it would be, but it's complicated. So I hope you appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. I do believe it is relevant to the 8th principle.
Right. Yes, it is. Ted had his hand up next that I see. I actually see that. Look at that. Hi, Ted.
So I was sort of surprised when you said that, like, I forget, you gave a name, but sort of abolitionists
Yes.
and abolition wasn't perceived as I think you said a spiritual mandate.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can't, maybe I'm speaking from, a modern time, so I can't see else what else it would have been, how it couldn't be perceived as one. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that, because I found that very surprising to hear.
Sure. Yeah. So the short of that is simply this: the rugged individualism, which continues to be a stumbling block and an obstacle for collective action in our nation at large, was elevated to such a height of importance that it was your choice, Ted, as a Unitarian, whether you were a minister or not, if you supported abolition. It was your freedom of conscience. There was no sense of this is what the faith is and what we're called to do together. Outside of trying to live a good life, perfect our character, all of the, bromides that made up sort of the Unitarian talk, salvation by character, the brotherhood of man, all that stuff sounds good, but for some reason they didn't put together character and brotherhood of man as making sure that we're all aiming towards abolition. I think it's safe to say that a majority of Unitarians, and probably a higher majority of Unitarian ministers, were in favor of abolition. But in the South, that wasn't so. I mean, John Calhoun himself was a leading member of that church in Charleston. And they certainly weren't preaching abolition. And so, there's a great story. I think I've shared this. Moncure Conway from Fredericksburg, actually. I know that Nicole Gray has a connection with Fredericksburg. He was known as the man who gave it all away. He became a Unitarian minister, but he was the son of plantation owners. And he got called to the Unitarian Church in DC, All Souls. Well, All Souls, being in DC, was founded by John Quincy Adams and by John Calhoun. So it was founded by a Massachusetts abolitionist and by a South Carolina secessionist. And so when Conway comes and is preaching this, before the Civil War, he lasted about 14 months. So there was freedom of the pulpit, but there really wasn't too, right? That's true. That's still true today, I'm sure. I mean, there's some things that, you don't say, or you don't say the right way. You may not have a job long. But it was much different then. There was not an assumption that, I'm going to church and part of my going to church is me standing up for these values on Main Street. It was not the cultural milieu of how people understood religion before, the early 20th century, and more strongly so by the 1950s. Is that clear enough?
So I guess what you're saying, when you said spiritual mandate, you meant as a faith, not as it's not that it's not a spiritual issue. People regarded it probably as a spiritual issue at the time, but it wasn't, because I like your freedom of conscience point. It was like, well, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about your soul going to heaven, not whether somebody is enslaved.
Yes.
Is that get what you're getting? Okay. That makes sense now. Thank you.
And so as Unitarianism drifts away from traditional Christianity, towards the transcendentalists, towards the free thinkers, and then eventually towards the humanists, they're like, we've got to be concerned with this world. But before then, it was convenient for them to be able to say, we're just talking about the matters of the spirit. There's a famous saying of a Presbyterian minister when they were founding the state of Kentucky. He was also in the Assembly of Kentucky. and someone brought up that, they didn't think that slavery should be permitted in this brand new Commonwealth of Kentucky. And the Presbyterian minister, who was a member of the assembly, was like, "We don't bring matters of the spirit into this chamber, sir. This is about the law." And that's how a lot of people thought. Now, I think we have evolved, hopefully, or revolved, or however you want to put it, to think that they should be much more aligned, but that was not the prevailing worldview of the 19th century. I hope that's clear enough for us to continue. All right. Wonderful. I don't see any other hands. So I'm going to give you all a chance. This is a rise up. So just, if you've been sitting too long, stand up. I have to do this all the time because I only have like 92 and a half minutes. I can never sit in any one stretch. All right. Oh. All right. And breathe deeply but gently. And I'm going to give you a question for breakout, and then we'll come back and we'll start talking about the report. And I probably share some of the recommendations from the first chapter or two, and then we'll kind of get up to speed with focusing on the report next. But I hope you all found this beneficial grounding, because, obviously we can't talk about everything all the time or else we never get anywhere. All right. So the question that I want you to consider, let's see, what is it? All right. It's going to be very simple. What is one thing you hope to understand better after tonight's class? So when I send you into breakout rooms, make sure that you say hello to all your new friends. And what do we have? We have 19. So I'm going to make 4 breakout rooms so you have a little more time to talk. And you're going to be there for 5 minutes. So that's roughly a minute a person. So, make sure someone's keeping time. And I look forward to seeing you back in about 5¼ minutes. Make sure you say yes when it asks you to enter a breakout room. You got it, Mary?
I think I've been muted.
No, I can hear you, but you should say,
That's because I'm temporarily unmuting.
yeah, you just
The
need to
host
go to
muted me.
you need to go to a breakout room is all.
Yeah, the host muted me when the dog was barking.
I'm going to assign you to a breakout room right now. All right. Just say yes when they go to ask you if you want to go in that breakout room. All right.
Yes.
All right. You got it? All right. What'd you get? Yay. I won't be ready for another 40 minutes or so. I doubt we'll be able to end at 8:30. There we go. Hey, hey.
Hey, hey.
Hey.
will be our only breakout room for this class. We usually have 2 a night. All right, y'all. I'll give us a couple minutes. What was 1 or 2 important things lifted up that folks want to understand better after tonight's class? Go ahead, Dana.
In our group, I think a lot of us wanted to understand the gap between where we stand as a congregation and adopting the 8th principle, what the resistance might be to doing so.
There's resistance?
Well, not that I've experienced, thankfully.
We haven't encountered any on the team, that's for sure, but okay.
Awesome.
Now, what I'll say about that is you don't want to adopt anything like that, just like throw it up with no one ever seeing it. You know, that's why we've had a whole year worth of programs like this to get people prepared. So I can report from the board and from the 8th principal project team, 2 members of which are here. We haven't heard any resistance. So thanks. All right. Who else? Shannon?
Okay, so there's 2 words that came up, which was awareness and intention. But a specific question was around how we will live into the 8th principle once it's adopted. And then also just getting some practical information on how to be, again, back to the awareness, how to be aware of our personal actions and our group actions moving forward.
Perfect. So being aware of our personal actions is a personal journey that's different for every one of us. You know, some of us do it with circles of accountability or therapists or, you know, good friends who are willing to tell us the cold hard truth directly. But it's best done really with training and an intentionality of, you know, learning to hear yourself, what you're about to say before you say it, know what you're going to do before you do it. And, you know, having real, you know, friends who are not like you, who can reflect back to you how your actions and words are perceived. As for how we live into the 8th principle, well, that's going to be determined over time. Basically, it becomes a lens through which we look at all of our programs and ministries. And, you know, and so we'll have an 8th principle steering team, which will be tied to the Council on Ministries. And they'll be continuing the education and the push to remind every group, team, ministry, program, function in our congregation, you know, all right, so how does this look through an 8th principle lens? And that'll be different for everything we do. But it's sort of an operational piece, similar to what we have done with the Green Sanctuary approach to, you know, looking at all of our, you know, our actions through environmental lens. And so, but exactly what it means, we don't know right now. But basically it means we'll always be asking, is this in right relationship with our call to be dismantling white supremacy? You know, who have we left out? What have we said that we shouldn't have said that way? I mean, all those things, you know, will be part of what we do, and it's going to take time, and especially to get to everything we do. And this is you know, this is going to take years to flesh out exactly what that means for every group. And, you know, like any, you know, spiritual goals are lofty. So this is a generational pursuit. So it's not like we're going to do this and then next year we be good. You know, you can give us a star. We've gotten there. That's not how this works. This is generational.
You're funny.
I'm funny. Yes, but looks aren't everything. Any other responses? All right, good. So, love it. So let's just begin to look a little bit at the report. So I'm going to share a screen for a bit. You know, you can always get out of the screen sharing dominating your whole screen by hitting escape. And you can change your view to gallery on the side instead of just seeing my mug after we go into screen share. All right, just a couple of Zoom tips for that. All righty, rights. And I got this straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, the commission itself. And so these are our commissioners, Sir Lebert on the left, Mary Byron, the white woman standing behind with the papers. I actually we rented her house when I was an intern in Ridgewood. Leslie Takahashi, a longtime colleague, just an amazing preacher and writer and social justice warrior. This man to her right is, he's Dr. Elias Ortega, and Dr. Ortega is now the president of Meadville Lombard Seminary. He used to live in Madison, New Jersey, and be over at Drew University, and he's very close friends of Anya, myself. And next to him is Natalie Fenimore, whom we were close to when we were in the DC area while she was in Silver Spring. She's now at our congregation on Long Island. So this was the commission. Okay. All right, here we go. And so the commission report focuses primarily on 10 different fields of congregational life. They're on your screen. I will share this report with you, this PowerPoint. Theology, governance, congregations and communities, hospitality and inclusion, living our values in the world, religious professionals, educating for liberation, innovations and risk-taking, restoration and reparations, accountability and resources. This is how the book is divided into chapters. There's a couple of other chapters. There's a final sort of concluding chapter. And there's an opening chapter called Trends, where they kind of talk about where our faith is today and talk about why the commission was started in the first place. All right, so they begin with theology. And I'm going to stop the screen share just for a moment. And so one of the things that the commissioners were able to identify is some of the stumbling blocks that kept us from being our best selves, especially in the last 40 years, were because we haven't spent enough time developing a deep, sound theology of what we proclaim to be true and how we live it. Too many Unitarian Universalists, and those who have been around a longer time may be familiar with this. They were really good at telling you what they didn't believe and, what sacred scripture they didn't want to hear much out of. And, I see Peretti shaking her head. And, what wasn't to their taste. But actually the positive affirmational proclamation part of theology, who are we as a people? What grounds us in a life of faith? What are we supposed to do because we believe these things to be true? This was not the thrust of Unitarian Universalism really from 1950 to 1990, and really has changed dramatically since then. And frankly, since I've come into the ministry, that's what we work on. We work on proclamation because we know that without proclaiming what we actually are for, it's really difficult to actually talk about who we are as a people of faith. So I'll go back to this, the slide, which I don't see anymore. Let me find it again. Okay, that's why. Here we go. And action. So these are the recommendations from the theology chapter. All right, sorry about that. Sometimes my cursor goes wild. And so our faith traditions as Unitarians and Universalists require us to address equity, inclusion, and diversity issues. Faith and covenant are not dirty words. I was once preaching at a congregation in Northern Virginia, and it wasn't the one that I served or Reverend Anya served. And I kept talking about how, we had the faith for our times. And I was accosted. That's the actual right word, by two grumpy members telling me that we weren't a faith. He didn't want to really talk about my ideas. He just wanted to tell me what words I couldn't use. I don't have much patience for that, and neither should you. If freedom and individualism are our most important values, we have little to offer in these times. Why might they say that? Well, we talked a little bit about the rampant individualism that ends up being an excuse for license, meaning that we can do whatever we want, we can believe whatever we want, and that we're not bound to a collective vision of improvement and social betterment. And we need to expand the values that we hold dear. And that's one thing that they bring out in this report. These times require a liberatory faith that invites us each into the spiritual work of empathy and healing. We need to start thinking of our religious lives as an attempt to liberate not just people, but ourselves. And not just ourselves, but the best in everybody. And we need to work hard on the spiritual work of empathy and of healing. I once had a situation in a congregation where a very wonderful member just went and started screaming at my 24-year-old director of religious education because this person didn't think my DRE was doing what she should be doing. And when I finally got her to calm down and stop flailing her arms and screaming at this pregnant 24-year-old colleague of mine, her response to me was, "Oh, I like to be brutally honest." And all I could say to her was, "I don't really think it's ever good to be brutal, but you certainly were." And so this is the deeper faithful living that this report is trying to call us into. No matter what our truth is, how we express it is part of the expression. Justice making. This is a tough one for us. Justice making is not a substitute for a coherent theology. Faithful justice making requires a liberatory theology. And you certainly hear Intern Ali, Reverend Anya, and I talk about this frequently from the pulpit. Whether we're talking about the foundational principles this nation is founded on, whether we're talking about what I believe is a more enlightened way to read sacred scripture, whether we're bringing up poetry or examples of faithful living in the past or present, we need more than just we are carrying the right sign at the right rally. It's not enough for a religious institution. All right, let me get, all right. An articulation of what is commonly believed among us does not have to result in a creedal test for membership or involvement in our communities. So again, one of the things that Unitarian and Universalism brought to the religious world more than most other systems is you don't have to swear allegiance to a creed, a list of statements about what God is and God is not. Yet at some point, similar to that first comment, we need to be able to say who we are as a people. What defines us? What makes us special? And so things commonly believed among us is actually a term from struggling with, trying to do that in the past. And somehow, and the principles are one way that we do that, which is one reason we think it's so important to add the 8th principle to the existing 7. We need to be able to affirm who we are and why we're gathering and what makes us different and special and why we come here instead of nowhere or instead of somewhere else. All right, let's keep going through these and then I'll ask for questions and we'll probably just get through the theology tonight because I don't want to do too much of this. My guess is most of you haven't had a chance to read this text. But I wanted to get us started so you have a sense of how I'm going to lead the class and you can tell me how I can do it better. We need to put greater emphasis on what it means to be bound to one another in an interdependent web and in keeping with our covenantal tradition. The covenant is how we agree to be in relationship. What do we promise to be to and for one another? A greater emphasis on the theological basis for our work for diversity, equity, and inclusion will help us to make decisions about the forms of this work most appropriate for our individual and shared faith lives. Again, we need to get back to theology, to articulating the things that we hold most dear, why we hold them most dear, what they say to us, what they have to say for our community and for the larger world. And these are just the last conclusions here. Re-engaging with our theological legacy and its use will both ground our efforts to welcome all who are drawn to our faith and provide resources for resilience for Unitarian Universalists in these difficult times. Reinterpretation of our theological legacies should be liberatory and articulate our commitment to affirming and welcoming those who have been marginalized in our larger society and within our communities. Acknowledgement of anti-oppression work as a theological mandate is essential. This is the 8th principle. We need to resurrect, research, document, and teach the words of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQ individuals, women, and others who have been largely lost through though their presence has been with us throughout history, because these constitute a valuable tool for our times. And we need to be educated about the covenantal nature of our faith so we can allow communities to support and nurture one another as the overall U.S. climate becomes hostile to liberal religion and is becoming more disinterested in a life of faith, especially a devoted, deeply held life of faith that includes how we're called to be in the world. So, like all of this presentation, there's going to be a whole lot. So what I'm going to stop here. We're going to try to do 4 of these next week and 4 of these the following week and a wrap up. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is this. So I want you to come to a class with a question based on this text. Anyone who wants to focus or co-lead on a given chapter, let me know. I'm more than happy to share the microphone. You don't have to, but it's just, it's a way to engage. Some people like to do that, and I love to share the floor. And I'm going to do my best to make this as digestible as possible, but it's a whole lot, as you're seeing. I just have a few closing comments that I really want to make sure that you hear. Every institution of any kind in our nation has had this journey with white supremacy and not living up to its highest ideals. Ours is no exception, not just at the association level, but on the congregational level. I've heard some stories. I probably won't share them here because we got too much to cover. But that doesn't mean we need to despise ourselves. It means we need to hear the truth clearly, and we need to be prepared to make reparation in whatever ways we can. And we need to rededicate ourselves in a theologically grounded way that makes it clear to us, to everyone else in our institution, and people who come to learn about us, that we have the courage to chase this nasty pollution of white supremacy out of our institutions, hopefully forever. Again, this is a generational struggle. And, the weird thing about our last year, specifically with COVID and the George Floyd protests and everything that's at the WNBA and the NBA leading the way on a cultural public level of saying that anti-racism is necessary. Something tells me, and I've heard from Black leaders that I respect, that this time feels different. But if people like us aren't willing to take up this work and to keep driving it to its conclusion, it won't be different. And so I can't thank you enough for wanting to spend your time with something as dry as a Congregational Association report and analysis, because it is one of the ways that we begin to look at this deeply. Yes, we could spend 20 weeks going every, letter and phrase in this text, and some of you may choose to do so, and I'll help you create reading groups and be there with you, but we need a broad-based encounter with this as a presentation at first, I think. And, hopefully, those of us in leadership will be taking this back to the board and the various teams to help them see what parts of these recommendations we can begin to imagine what they look like at UUCM, because, these are specific and broad-based recommendations, but they are going to have specificity so they can be implemented with power in our own institution. So, I used to be an electrician, which means I'm very good with time. I'm a drummer too, so it's like 8:28. So I just want to open the floor for any questions, concerns, or comments, and then we will wrap this up. My hope is to keep this to 90 minutes, but if we need more, I may ask your permission to take more time with this. So.
I have a question,
Gray.
Reverend Scott.
Thank you, Nicole Gray.
How long did it take to put this report together?
Yeah, they put it together. It took about 2 years. Yeah, I think this was released in 2000. This was released in 2020, but they had the preliminary report in 2019 because I was there the day it happened when they presented it at General Assembly in Spokane, 2019.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Sue Ralpher, yes. Oh, you're muted, Sue. Sorry. You're still muted, Sue.
Okay, there we go. Now you can hear me, right? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. So my question might not be so easy to answer, but it would be really helpful to me, particularly in the context of the 8th principle, is that if I knew how the origin of the first 7 principles, like they didn't just all show up one day, or maybe they did, like.
Oh, sure.
Me,
I can share that.
Yeah. So
Sure.
if I don't know how easy that.
Oh, I can do that in,
Okay.
in a minute or two. So in the 1980s, as they realized more people were coming into the congregations, something happened in the early 1980s that people started coming back to our congregations. And they realized they didn't have enough tools to teach them about the faith. And they looked into our history and saw that there had been statements of things commonly believed among us. That's why the commission used that language. And they said, we need something like that. And they had a committee that came together and lots of conversations. And in 1985, the first version of the 7 principles were submitted. I think the last one that was submitted was the 7th principle, the interdependent web. And then they rearranged them. And in 1985, 86, they sort of became codified in the UUA bylaws. So it was a denomination-wide effort over a couple of years with a small group doing most of the wordsmithing.
But they were all at once.
Yes.
Right? It wasn't like there were 5 and then they weren't like the amendments to the Constitution where there were like a bunch.
So the first group had 6, I believe, but just months later, the 7th one came in because they realized they had missed something. And there had been calls in the 80s to have more actionable principles, and they were rejected because for a lot of reasons. I don't know that history and the specificity, but so there were calls to have not an 8th principle per se, but yeah, the sort of spiritual mandate. This is what we should be doing instead of this is what we should be believing, and so this is a pivot. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mary E. Jones.
Yes. I'm very, very new to the church.
Of course.
And one of the things that drew me to it, besides your sermons that let me know I still had a soul, was its inclusiveness.
Mm-hmm.
The strong Black women, the embracing of the LGBT community. It was so fantastic. You as the Reverend, I'm not seeing any problem.
Mm-hmm.
regarding race or white supremacy.
Well, bless your heart.
So
I think-
can you tell me if there is some in our congregation? Because I'm not seeing it.
So, you know, I don't want to go too far into that tonight. Read the report and you will hear religious professionals of color, you know, average folks who happen to be, you know, Black, Indigenous people of color, and the absolute horror some of them experienced as congregants. We have a special congregation. We have one of the most diverse congregations in any suburban setting in Unitarian Universalism. So, and it's been that way for a long time. We have our stuff, and we'll, you know, there may be a time to talk about our stuff, but we are different, and you recognize something real, even though we have our stuff. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else want to share something before we go? Seeing no hands, I'm going to share a reading. And I don't know who wrote this. It doesn't say in the manual. So it's called Toward a Place of Wholeness. We are Unitarian Universalists. When we lift up our 7 principles, hopefully soon to be 8, some of us think of them as a form of theology, but they are more important to our collective than that. They do not tell us what we should believe. They tell us how we should be. They tell us how we should act in the larger world and with each other. We are brought here today by the fact that Unitarian Universalism has fallen short of the image that was presented to the world and to many of those who embraced this faith. But we are also brought here today by the truth that Unitarian Universalism has shifted course to move toward a place of wholeness, a place that perhaps never existed for us. It has been a long and sometimes unforgiving road to today. But we are here today because we are mindful of that past, because we have hope for the future, and because we are summoning courage needed for the work. We want the practice of this faith to be a fulfilling manifestation of its promise. So continue to open your hearts and seek new ways of understanding.
Oh, amen. Thank you for
That's our
that.
closing reading. And I will say one more thing about the principles too, because I just thought about that reading that piece. In the UUA bylaws, the only way they could get the first 7 principles passed was by including a clause, and it's in Article 2 of the bylaws, that says these bylaws will be revisited every 10 to 15 years and revised as necessary. They've never been revised. 35 years later, there was a commission that was impaneled in 2008. One of the members of my former congregation was part of that panel. They worked their tails off, and they really came up with some good stuff. And a block of resistors encouraged people to reject even discussing them for another year. So that was in 2009. So the principles were never supposed to be all one thing at one time or to stay the same forever. Because, you know, Paul Tillich, the famous liberal Lutheran theologian, says language changes over time. It accrues different baggage. And, you know, what meant something to this generation may mean something different to a generation from now or more. And so that's why we included in the UUA bylaws that the principles are supposed to be revised.
Rev
So,
Scott, I think, I don't know how many people know this or remember this, but in our narthex, on the way on the right-hand side, there is a big like calligraphy of the 7 principles. And it's huge, right? And it describes all the 7 principles in huge calligraphy and everything. And then underneath it is a small plaque that says something to the effect that, yeah, but you don't have to like, you know, you don't have to swear on these, you know, it's just, you know, I forget exactly the wording, but it's like, yeah, but.
not intended to be a creed. I think it says these words are not.
Yeah, we're not a creed. So even, typical UUs, we're like, we have this big, beautiful, here are our 7 principles. This is what we can agree on. And then on the very bottom, but we don't have to agree on them. so even there. So the next time you're in the narthex, hopefully soon, look for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's that dance between freedom and collective action, right? Being able to identify ourselves as a faith and still honoring individual conscience. And we will not resolve that tonight, is my guess. But I love you all real good, as they say in Baltimore. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Reverend Scott.
Can I ask a question that we could talk about next session? I'm wondering, and I will read the report by next time, and maybe this will answer the question. But I'm wondering who's driving the 8th principle. Like the eighth principle being brought to the fore. Is it because of disaffected members of color in different UU congregations? Is that what's driving the 8th principle, or is the 8th principle driven by white people realizing like, this is a little effed up, like our attitude's a little effed up, we need a attitude adjustment? Like, I'm not sure what's and I didn't know there was something to read beforehand, otherwise I would have done it, but I want to respect the time, but maybe that's something that we could talk about.
First I'll deconflict. The class is on the report. The 8th principle is just a piece of what the report recommends. The 8th principle came about really because of this pivot that's been happening since the early 2000s, that we need to be saying what we're supposed to be doing as a faith imperative in our principles. People have been talking about this, since the mid 2000s. And around 2012, a couple of folks, Paula Cole Jones, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the gentleman from Germantown. Maybe Annalise remembers his name. She may not either. I can see her look. They came together. She's an African-American leader of All Souls DC, and he's a white leader of the Germantown congregation. And they said, you know what? Because this was after the Trayvon Martin shooting. And they said, we need to be saying the work we need to be doing in our principles. And they started shopping it around, and a lot of people began to adopt it. It sort of started in Philly and DC because that's where those two were. And we've been taking it to the denominational level ever since. And really, our strategic plan group told us that this was one of the things we should be doing. So congregationally, we're doing it because it's in our strategic plan. And frankly, it's work we should be doing anyway, whether it is in the strategic plan. But so anyway, so that's the short answer. All right. And yeah, that's my understanding of it. So I can talk to you offline more about it. But I do want to spend most of our time on the report because it's dense. So I welcome any of your questions, and I will free anyone who wants to split. You don't have to worry about me. I'm not taking attendance anymore. So if you need to go, and I'll stay on if you want to chat some more, Norma, but I'm just letting you know, I don't want to hold everybody in case, but that's the difference. I just wanted to disambiguate there, between those two things, because the adopting the 8th principle is just one small recommendation in this entire report. All right.
Disambiguate is a big word.
Well, it's not bad for 8:42 in the PM.
That's a big word. Awesome. I look forward to next week. I've gotten a lot out of today's session.
Good. I thank you. I did record, so if we do have new folks coming on, we can share. So love you all so much. And
Reverend Scott, I believe that guy's name was Bruce Pollock Johnson.
That's right. Bruce Pollock Johnson was the guy from Germantown.
I just Googled it for you.
All right. Yay. Thank you, Deborah Ann. And thank you, everyone. Blessings.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Reverend Scott, I will send over the digital through Google.
Okay.
Cool. For you. I don't think email is going to work with this. All right.
Yeah. That's probably right. All right, Dan. See you later, man.
Have a good night.
All right.